Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Skill Up session. My name is Emily Sprenger. I'm an academic trainer in the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I am thrilled to be able to have two of our School of Business and Economic professors joining us today for today's session entitled Top 10 Skills for Self-Development as a Doctoral Learner with Dr. Brian Allen and Dr. Marie Bakari. We do encourage you to ask all of your questions in the chat. I will keep an eye on all of that. And as time permits, and as Dr. Allen and Dr. Bakari pause and ask me if there are any questions, I will get to that accordingly. We are recording our session and we will post it on our YouTube channel, and we will also post it in our CTL Resource Center underneath our webinar section. Okay, I think that about does it for now. If you have questions, you can find me in the chat, and I am going to turn this over to Dr. Marie Bakari.
Well, thank you, Emily. And I am so excited to do this presentation with Dr. Allen. To move forward a little bit here. Anyway, so as we were preparing this presentation, we had some very lengthy discussions about what are those things that students really need to grasp before they really get into the dissertation. So some of the things that you're going to learn about today, we want you to consider, first of all, let me give you a little quick analogy. When you go to the eye doctor, you go in and you see things a certain way, and then they start putting all these different lenses in front of you until things become more clear. Well, consider that as part of your doctoral journey. You need to focus your lens, but you're going to do it with certain things in mind, like your education. What has been your experience thus far? What do people come to you and ask for your professional opinion on? So the other things that you want to consider too is, how do you differentiate between what you think you know, what you should know, and what you can know about your dissertation topic? So ask yourself, what am I willing to change to become that expert? Because the whole goal is for you at the end of your dissertation journey is to be an expert. Dr. Allen?
Well, welcome everyone. My dad used to say that an expert is a former drip under pressure, and I'm not sure I like that definition, but the one thing that I like to think about when I think about an expert is I like to think about the Malcolm Gladwell book. And in Malcolm Gladwell's book, he discusses this idea, and he cites a study by Erickson done in 2008, and he noted that to become an expert required 10,000 hours of practice. But there's a problem with Gladwell's particular definition of this. And part of the problem is that he missed this one component of Erickson's study, in that to become an expert, Erickson noted that it required the right kind of instruction to direct the practice toward error mitigation and elimination. In other words, it wasn't a straight line from one point to the other. And so I am I'm very much into fitness, and one of the things that we talk about in fitness and learning how to lift a particular way or to do a gymnastics movement or whatever is you'll hear this statement, and it's that you'll hear people say practice makes perfect. And I'm going to tell you that that's baloney. Perfect practice makes perfect, right? But the problem is, if you're not perfect at the thing that you're supposed to be an expert on, then you're going to have some imperfect practice until you get to the point where you have some perfect practice. And you only do that by ingesting further knowledge and experience and understanding. And so within the doctoral journey, you have to ask yourself, do I already have the understanding of the scholarly language in the area that I want to research? And if you don't, what are you willing to do to get to that level of understanding? Are you willing to put in 10,000 hours, right? And I love Dr. Dr. Bakari put this in here only because she knows I'm mathematically challenged, right? That comes down to 417 days, 13 months, 1.2 years. In other words, this is a process, a deliberative process that takes time. And there, invariably what happens is doctoral students come in and they say, I got this. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to finish this in exactly 3 months and 1 year. No, probably not. It might take you a little bit longer than that 1 year, right? So understand that you're going to come into this perhaps behind in your reading. You might even be 10,000 pages behind in your reading. And that's okay. And as long as you understand that, and you understand that there's going to be some effort that has to come into play here to make that effective, you're going to have to take into this new principle that perhaps you didn't have to do as part of a master's program. Now, as we jump to the next slide, what I want to just talk about is a little bit of this thing that we never really want to talk about. We always start out the new year and we say, I'm going to do this better. I'm going to do this type of exercise. I'm going to do this. But invariably, we fall short. And come the end of the year, maybe we're not as, we haven't lost as much weight as we wanted to, or grown as much hair as we wanted to. That hasn't happened for me despite my efforts, right? We have to talk about time management. In other words, are you willing to put forth the time that it takes to become the expert and then avoid those things that would be the challenges for you in the process of getting that expertise? And so let's talk a little bit about some of those challenges. One of the biggest challenges early on for early researchers, for new research, we'll call you neophyte researchers even, for new research, is that there are great rabbit holes. Now, this is not personal confessions of Dr. Ellen, that I love me a good rabbit hole. And what I mean by that is it is where you start on the internet. And I'm sure none of you have ever done this, where you say, I want to know about this one thing. And then you watch a video on YouTube, and then you go to Google because it gets you to this next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. And 3 hours later, you're like, I don't even know what I started on that got me down this rabbit hole. But what happens is you're so disconnected from the original intent of your search that you've wasted precious time. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some methods to avoid the rabbit holes. But we're also going to talk about some practices as part of time management that are important. Some of those are going to include something simple as writing for 1 hour a day. As I went through my dissertation journey, I made sure that I was reading 1 hour a day and that I was writing 1 hour a day and that I edited 30 minutes a day. And I never edited anything that I was working on at the same time when I was writing. I always came back to it with fresh eyes. And so guaranteed I was going to have 2.5 hours every day, 6 days a week. And in my particular case, I chose to take Sunday and as time that I spent with my family, and I didn't do anything. Now, guess what? To have an hour a day dedicated to research or writing or whatever is going to have to involve some sacrifice. And I think that therein is one of the challenges, is we forget that this degree at this level requires a level of sacrifice that sometimes comes at a cost of, I don't know, going to the club, watching the latest episode of X, Y, and Z. I don't know. Maybe it's the British Bake Off. I think that's what Dr. Bakari watches. That's what she told me. No. But you also have to take some time to step away and contemplate. So you read and you step away and contemplate. Now, I have this nifty little thing that I carry with me all the time. And yes, I am a nerd and I will openly admit it, but I carry a little notepad with me with a pen, and I always carry my phone with me. Those things are with me at all times. No matter where I go, I take them with me. And as I am doing research, as I'm conducting an idea, and I contemplate something that I read, I go back and I make a note of it. And I use the notes in my phone, and I write things down. I'll even wake up in the middle of the night because I'm old and I can't sleep through the whole night or something like that, and I'll write it down. And in doing so, what will happen is that it helps my daily reading and it helps my daily writing to be effective. And it helps me to avoid those rabbit holes because I know I've got a limited time to write, to read, and to contemplate. And ultimately, all of those things come down to our fancy little figure in the corner. You've got to have balance. It's all about balance, 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 balance. You can spin only so many plates. And sometimes some plates have to come crashing to the floor, and that's okay, because you have to look at the long-term goal of what you want to achieve in your doctoral program. All right, I'm going to stop for a few moments because I can just blither on for hours, and I'm going to let Dr. Bakari talk some more about one of the tools that's super helpful in this process.
Well, thank you, Dr. Allen. And actually, that's a great segue into our next skill, which is journaling. Dr. Allen explained that he carries his little notebook, he carries his phone, but even having just the old-fashioned notebook, journal, you know, how many of us got journals, new journals for Christmas, right? But this is a great time to start making those notes. How often, you know, as you go through your day, think about all the different things that you think about all the time. I mean, you could be sitting at the drive-thru waiting for your lunch and, gee, what did I read this morning? Oh, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. But, you know, with this thing that happened at work, oh my goodness, now I see how it's working. That's something that you might want to journal, because that's that thought that you had at, you know, 10, 12 this morning that you really want to grasp onto and hold on to, because by the time you get home and you're sitting down for your 1 hour of writing, what was that thing I was thinking about this morning? It's totally gone. So journaling can take shape in so many different ways. You can doodle. I do that a lot when I'm thinking. You can do mind mapping. You know, what are the things, say when you have to write that literature review, what are the basic things that you have to write about in that literature review? Oh, and what are all these other things, and where do all of those fit? Mind mapping in a journal is a great way to visualize the shape of your literature review. Some other ideas here. You know, scribbling little notes, writing a full paragraph. I mean, you may have a 15-minute break and a cup of coffee, and you're thinking, you know, I've been struggling with this paragraph. Let me try writing it out. And you have record of it. So when you get back to actually working on your computer where your dissertation is housed, the notes are right there. All those thoughts can be triggered once again. Lastly, I want to end with this idea. When you're going through the learning process at the doctoral level, there's a lot of learning that takes place. The trouble is, if we don't connect that learning to something that we are actively engaged in, the problem is a lot of that learning is going to go away. So this is what we mean when we say we want to avoid that learn and flush. We don't just want to learn it for that paper or for that course, but we want to continuously build on that learning so that by the time we get to having to write that dissertation, you know, all of this knowledge that we've accumulated over the past 10, 12, 14 courses, it's all sticking, it's all making sense, it's all creating a picture of what it is that we're going to study, what that lens is that we have to look at problems through. So Dr. Allen, I'm going to pass it on to you, sir.
Let me add just a quick something to journaling and the idea of learn and flush. One of the challenges that we see as faculty members, and certainly as doctoral chairs and mentors, is where a student will have received certain instruction and they receive it early in the coursework that they're doing. And by the time that they get to where they're ready to start thinking about their topic, or maybe they've already thought about their topic and we'll talk about this objective versus subjective research here in just a moment, but by the time they get to that, they don't see those connections anymore, because what they've done is they've gotten through the course, they get the grade that they think is acceptable, and then they move on to that next course, and they don't realize that part of the way that courses are designed is to give you the incremental steps of learning, so that by the time you're actually starting to pull out from the body of literature and understand and diagnose an existing problem, they've missed how the connection of those previous courses fit in. And so Dr. Bakari's comment about avoiding the learn and flush and keeping a journal are absolutely part and parcel, because they lead into this next idea. And I'll pause here for just a moment. If I ask you what it means to be objective versus being subjective, would somebody go ahead and you can unmute yourself if you'd like, or you can type. Tell me what the word objective means. Give me your best definition of objective.
Hi, this is Iram. Objective is observational, and subjective is when you say something, the dialogues, the content.
Okay, that is one definition. Okay, objective means unbiased. It's fact and measurable. Okay, what about let's flip the coin. What about subjective?
Okay, subjective is personal.
It is personal. We like to use this. Well, it can be biased, and it can also be unbiased perceptions, right? So we can look at something subjective and we say, well, I'm unbiased, but this is the way it is. Dr. Bakari and I do that all the time. No, I'm just joking. Actually, I do that all the time, and Dr. Bakari goes, no, that's not the way that works. No. So if I'm looking at something that is my personal opinion, or it's a judgment, or it's a perception, a point of view, a feeling, right? Then I run into some challenges, right? So one of the things that we see often is, and I'm going to use my air quotes, these are often dangerous, right? My friend experienced this, or my community, or that community, or X, Y, and Z demographic, right? Now, we say this, and my dad used to have this saying that he said all the time. My dad was a officer in the Air Force and was a contract officer, and he said 87.4% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And his point was kind of a joke at the fact that he had a degree in economics, and the reality is that you can take a lot of economists, and I'm not picking on economics here, right, or economists in any way, but I'm just going to say this because I think it's funny. You can take all the economists in the world, put them in a row, and they'd never reach an end. They'd never reach a conclusion. Now, but therein is kind of the point, right? That is I'm assessing economists based on my personal opinion, my judgment, my feeling, my point of view. But the truth is that enough economists are going to look at things that they can give you observations and measurement over time, historical. And then they can provide you a factual assessment or an impartial assessment based on those observations and measurements. See how one is objective and one is subjective. Now, when we get to research, there's something that is going to come up here that is absolutely imperative, and Dr. Bakari is going to talk a little bit about that, but it's that passion. It's when we're looking at something and a pattern, and I think Dr. Bakari's got that, don't you? Or maybe it's me. I don't know. They all run together. But one thing that I do want to talk about here when we talk about objective and subjective is invariably I get determinism. When you're looking at a topic and you say, I'm going to do this research and I am going to find the answer to this problem, or I am going to determine what the problem is. And as nicely as I can put this, you're probably not going to solve it. You're probably not going to determine it from one dissertation. Now, does that mean that you can't add to a resolution to a problem over time? Certainly you can. But as we look at things, we inquire, we explore, we inquire in a means that will allow us, within the confines, within the limitations and the delimitations of the study that we are going to conduct, we're going to do our best to find some answer. Doesn't mean it's the answer. It's not determinate, right? And the reason it's not determinate is because there's just too many variables. I see the world in one lens. Dr. Bakari will see it in another. Emily may see it in another. And because of our worldview, our experiences, different cultural backgrounds and paradigms and context, we're going to see things with some partiality. If we are willing to take that partiality, accept it, document it, and then subjectively annotate from the body of the existing literature without cherry picking, guess what? We can be subjective, observational, measured learners who are researching a topic where there are real, clear opportunities to make a difference. Dr. Bakari, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you much. And just to continue on that theme there a little bit, Dr. Allen mentioned passion. Whenever we come to the point in our lives where we decide, yeah, we want to complete a dissertation so that for whatever reason, whether it's to get a job promotion or because we want to change careers or we want to give back to society in some meaningful way, that's passion. That's the passion that drives us, okay? That's the thing that gets us going and keeps us moving. That is our motivator. The pictures that I selected here, the person with the camera, this person is actually looking at something that I'm going to assume it's a he, that he wants to look at. He's selecting what he's looking at. The picture on the other side, though, this is more of an inspection, okay? This is where we get to find out, okay, how are things working? This is where we're asking those deep, hard questions about what we think we know. We're looking at the facts as explained in the literature and scholarship. We're looking at the experience as it is at this moment, either through quantitative examination or through qualitative inquiry. And we're putting this together, these two things together, to develop perhaps some new insights, to add to a theory, depending on the type of degree that we're seeking. But the difference is, yes, although we're looking at things closely from both of these views, one of them is selecting exactly what he wants to look at, whereas the other is being inspective, being inquisitive, being curious. And those are the elements that you really need to bring to your research, that curiosity, that want to know, that continuous learning, and the continuous search for literature. This is something that I see quite often when students are producing their literature reviews. They think it's a once and done. It's like, oh, I completed my literature review. Wow, it got that stamped. It got stamped by my committee as meets. I don't have to touch it again. But you're wrong. Yeah, Dr. Allen keep telling you that you're wrong about everything, right? But think about this. As you're doing your research, other people are doing research also, and they're adding to that body of knowledge. So when you are defending your dissertation, shouldn't you have the most current information, most current literature? Shouldn't that be part of your work as well? And indeed it should be. I tell my students literature review is not done until you defend and we stamp it. Until then, you continue to look for that literature, because you never know if somebody else's findings are going to alter an interpretation of what you have. You never know, but you have to remain curious. You have to be open to continuous learning, and that curiosity can't beat it. Dr. Allen.
Well, so let me talk a little bit about research strategies. And I actually like to think about this as not limiting yourself to the identification of the problem. Look for balanced arguments. What happens if somebody disagrees with your assessment of the problem, right? What about, avoiding this problem? Now, I am the father of 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And let me just tell you, they see the world very differently. Each and every child, who are now all adults, see the world very differently. But they use different words to describe the same events. And some of my children were very emotional about their view of the world, and some of them were very analytical, and it was all about the logic. And one of the things that I always thought was interesting is that some of my children would say, "You're not listening to what I'm saying." And then others would say, "You're not seeing what I'm saying." What were they actually telling me? They were telling me that one was a visual learner and one was emotional in their perception of the world. And that's okay. When you start looking at research and the body of literature, you have to be willing to be wrong. That's okay. Being wrong is okay. You may even go through the entire process of conducting conducting a literature review, collecting data, and then find out, guess what? My findings were kind of inconclusive. Inconclusive is not necessarily a bad thing, because you've proven what doesn't work. That's okay. Now, I can say that, and I'm going to put a caveat here. Dr. Allen said that. Don't quote me on it. Go to your chair, because your chair is your final authority. Your chair may say it does matter. So go to your chair. But I think this, okay? The other thing is, where do you find sources, right? Obviously, we have in-you resources. We have the librarians, it's the dissertation center. We have the applied doctoral center. We have academic writing. We have all the academic success center coaches. By golly, use Grammarly. It's the most important tool. If you are not a strong writer, it's okay. Start to become a strong writer by using the feedback that you use by using Grammarly. The other thing that I will tell you is, and we're going to talk about a log here in just a moment, right? But I want you to think about how you organize the resources and the literature that you get. Now, I do not expect you to write this down, but I want you to kind of think about this, okay? Even if you are a strong writer, right, Emily? So when I have students work on their literature review, I like to have them think about it this way. Now, we're going to try a thought experiment. How many of you have ever watched a nature show? I admit it, I love the Discovery Channel, okay? And that's not I'm not endorsing the Discovery Channel, all right? But what do they do if in the nature show? They're going to tell me about ants in the Amazon basin, but they start at the world. They show me the entire globe, and then they begin to pan down with the camera. So they start from the Earth, and then they go to South America, and then they go to Brazil, and then they go down to the Amazon basin, and then they go down to right over the river, and then by the river they go to a path, and then from the path they get down to the ants. So here's how I like to think about a literature review: oldest to newest, widest scope to narrowest research topic, biggest ideas to littlest ideas. And then just remember, if you're thinking about the camera, you're looking at the idea, you have to encapsulate that idea for your reader. So yes, you are 100% starting from the big picture so that your readers do not have to guess what the next logical step is. Don't create logical tripping hazards for your readers. And you do that by a thorough literature review. Okay, so now you're going, yeah, but I don't know how to do that. How do I organize it? How do I get to that point? All right, you ready to take us to the next slide, Dr. Bakari?
I am. Here we go.
All right, this is what I refer to as the Nerdogram. No, this is how I recommend. There are other ways that you can do this. So imagine that this is a spreadsheet. So I've got the location of my search. Now, in this particular case, I've only listed the NU library, but guess what? I could use Google Scholar. I could use Google. I'm not going to use Wikipedia, except, and there's a hint, unless I'm looking for terms. That's it. I'm not going to cite it because it's not a reputable source, but it may provide me search terms that I need. So let's assume that I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship because, why not? Because I'm a business professor. So my first search term is going to be entrepreneurship. And so I put that in the NU library, and I'm going to put some provisions on that. I want it to be full text. So I've got a Y there on the full text, and I want it to be scholarly research that is peer reviewed, and I put no time limits on it. So I get back 343,000 results. That's a whole lot of things for me to go through. Plus, I really need to limit it down to like 5 years. So then the next thing I'm going to do, and that goes down to the next line, I'm going to have, again, my source, my first search term, and notice that now I'm going to limit that to the last 5 years. So now I've got 148,092 results. That's still pretty big. And what I really want to know about is government funding as it relates to entrepreneurship. So now my second search term is going to be it was the third line, entrepreneurship. Funding is my second search term. And you've got all of the other same things on: full text, scholarly, peer-reviewed source, last 5 years, and now I'm down to 45,000. Guess what? I am not going to read 45,000 studies. It's not going to happen. Or as I used to tell my mom, and she says, that's not proper English, it ain't going to happen. All right. So now I'm going to do something different. I'm going to add a third search term, and that third search term is now government. And so notice that by keeping all of the parameters the same and now adding government as my third search term, I'm down to 28,960. Guess what? I'm pretty close to being able to narrow down a body of literature that is reasonable within the scope of what I want to start my inquiry about. Notice what I did with my literature review strategy for finding literature. Start at the big and work my way down to the small. Now, if any of you have ever seen my presentation on purple toenails, this is exactly the process that I talk about. And I did that for the CTL. So if you haven't seen it, I'm endorsing the purple toenails presentation. It is a great way to think about how to narrow down your topic from this very practice. Let's see if I thought of anything else. Oh, I'm going to give you a little hint that I think makes this process super informative and helpful. So when I conduct a literature review for any research that I am doing, and I read an article, and Dr. Bakari and I've talked about this many times, skim, and you're going to skim the articles to start with. Look at the research question, look at the methodology, look at the, so research questions, methodology, findings, and is it in line with what I want to study? If it is, table it and come back to reading it later on, okay? Then when you go back to read that particular article that you've identified, now I don't have it with me, but I read 90% of the articles that I read on a tablet, and I highlight those articles. And then after I've highlighted it, I go into my resource management software. Now, a lot of folks use ReferenceWorks. I personally like Mendeley. You can use Zotero. Whatever it is that you choose to use is kind of not important as much as this next step. When I read the article, I write a paragraph including citations and page numbers where I got my ideas. Then when I go to write my literature review, I simply go to my reference software and I plug in those paragraphs where they fit topically. Then all I have to do is minor editing, and guess what? I've written a literature review in half the time because I've spread that work over a longer period of time. Though that little tool saves hours and hours and makes my time management of my writing the most effective it can be. All right, I'm going to shush for a while and turn some time over back to Dr. Bakari.
I'm sorry, I
Well,
don't mean
thanks.
to step in
Yes.
right before you move to this next piece, but
Yes,
I just
please.
want to make sure we can cover it since it popped up in the chat. So your chart was helping us learn how to narrow your search and find materials that are more relevant to your particular research interests.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay, correct me if I was wrong on that. And then the last piece is, what's the benefit? This question came up in the chat, so I want to make sure we can address it. What's the
benefit of this?
Yep. I'm so
bit-
sorry. Of making sure that your articles are in the last 5 years.
In the last 5 years, you're trying to remain topically germane and within a recent body of literature, right? And so that's why you're limiting within the last 5 years. Typically, now some schools are different, and there are some domains that are going to be very different, right? So you're going to have some seminal work, quite frankly, that's going to be older, and you may have some literature in your respective domain that will break this standard, right? But it's a good practice to look at literature within the last 5 years from a foundational perspective, not necessarily from a foundational perspective, but building on a foundational perspective, right? So you have those seminal works. Now you're seeing how those things take place within the last 5 years. And I'm just going to tell you, my personal choice for students is when they are writing their problem statement, I ask them to try to cite within the last 3 years, because it's going to take them a year to do their literature review and probably potentially another year before they defend. So within the last 3 years. Now, is that the rule you're going to face with your chair? Maybe not. Maybe they're not as nerdy and difficult to deal with as I am, but that's okay. It's what you want. Now, the question is, why would I want to do this? And why would I have use this tool? And it's very simple. It's a way to avoid the rabbit hole, right? That's it. It's to keep you on track in your efforts of doing your literature review. And you may very well find, like, let's say I change that. Let's say I go to the next line, and instead of entrepreneurship, funding, and government, I change it to state government. And I bring it down, and it's super finite, and I only get 4,000 hits total results for that. Well, then I know I've got to go back up a level and change what those search terms are, because I need a greater body of literature to help me and facilitate that process of finding appropriate literature. So does that help?
That helps a lot, Dr. Allen. Thank you so much. I don't want to hold you up any longer because I'm sure we still have a little bit more to cover before Q&A, but thank you for addressing that.
Absolutely.
And before I jump into this, I've got one more reason for sticking to that 5-year rule. If I'm your chair, it's because I said so. End of story. But in all seriousness, that 5-year rule, particularly in business, because business changes so quickly, you want your dissertation to still matter when you finish it. So, keeping within the current body of literature, within the current body of thought, is very helpful for you after you've defended your dissertation and you go to publish, because then you don't have as much rework to do in order to get to publication. But you still want to check the literature before you publish, because who knows, there may be something else out there that has perhaps shifted something a little bit. But getting back to the root of the dissertation, it is writing. People will have blocks, people will have difficulties writing because they're not up and up on grammar, on APA. Their citations aren't always perfect. At the beginning, it doesn't matter too much. Just get the words on the paper. All of the polish, the spit shine, the tweaking the APA, checking the format. There are tons of resources to help you with that. But the bottom line is, if you don't have the words on the paper, you don't have anything to work with. I'll take you back to one of my favorite books that I like to share with students. It's by Anne Lamott, and it's called Bird by Bird. Now, the story behind the title of the book goes something like this. The author's brother had a report to do for school. He was in grade school. And he procrastinated and he put it off and he didn't do the report. So the night before he's due at the dinner table, he's about to have a nervous breakdown because his report isn't ready and he has to turn it in the next day. Eventually, his father figured out that he was upset about something, pulled him aside, heard the story, and then his father said some words of wisdom. Son, you're going to write that report bird by bird, because the whole assignment was write a paper about 40 different birds. Fact is, the author's brother was able to accomplish that. And he did it by taking it one piece at a time. When you get to writing your dissertation or even writing a paper, you start with the basic things. You start with an outline. With a dissertation, the outline is there for you. You get to fill in the pieces. But you're not trying to write the whole chapter in one day. You want to make sure that all the components we give you rubrics, we have all these different guidelines that you can follow to try to construct the best possible section by section by section until you get the entire chapter completed. But the point is, you gotta just put some stuff on paper and work with your committee to get it to where it is finely polished, beautifully aligned, it's feasible, and all of these other words that you're going to hear along the journey. When you put your first work on paper, it's going to look like something that I can't say on video. It's not going to be a great draft, folks. And understand that, and don't be hard on yourself. You are on a learning journey. So it's not just learning about the area where you're going to be an expert. You're learning other skills at the same time. You're learning writing skills and grammar skills and APA skills. You're learning how to manipulate Microsoft Word. And that's a complicated piece of software, if you ask me. But be patient with yourself, but know that you have to constantly work on these things while you're working on the dissertation. So be patient. And we're going to get to some other things that you can do here shortly that will help you along this writing journey. But remember, it's a journey. It starts with the first word, and it's going to continue for a while. You're going to go through several revisions and iterations. That's another word you're going to hear and probably get sick of hearing. But along the way, you're going to see that difference. I will tell you, one of the best tests, write your first draft of chapter 1. 6 months later, go back and read chapter 1 again. You're going to see a tremendous difference if you put the effort in to continually learn about the writing process and about the research process. So, Dr. Allen, off you go.
I have to unmute myself. I was too busy reading all these great questions and comments. All right, I have to ask this question. Define what a stupid question is.
No such thing as a stupid question.
The unasked one.
The one you don't ask.
That's right.
Yes.
It's the one that you didn't ask that you really need an answer for. That's the only dumb question, right? Period. It's okay. I'm going to ask this real simple question. How many of you already have a doctorate? I'm not seeing any hands. So my guess is that this is probably the first time you've done this. And guess what? You're not going to be an expert at the first time you do something. You're going to have to build that expertise over time. So ask yourself about the end game in the process. If the point of the end game is I want to cross the stage as a doctor, then I'm going to have to be willing to put my pride in my back pocket and ask some questions that quite frankly may be difficult to ask. Now, I've had students say, you know what? I've never actually done research in the library. Could I set up a meeting with you to go into the library to know how to conduct research? Yeah, you bet. We'll go spend the 30 minutes and I'll share my screen, use a Zoom meeting, just kind of like this, and we'll go through. And guess what? When we use the kind of the format of tracking their research, pretty soon they get on track. And does that mean I don't have to come back and readdress that? Well, of course not. Sometimes we do. But guess what? If they don't ask the questions, they don't know. All right. So I'm going to tell you how I feel about a particular vein of asking questions. Knowledge plus inference plus expertise plus self-motivation across domains equals lifelong learning plus a doctorate. Now, that's it, right? You're not going to get your doctorate just because you want to end and then you're never going to learn anything else again. This is the beginning of a journey. And that journey is going to require you to ask the hard questions, and then it's going to require you to do something that may be very difficult for you to do. And Dr. Bakari is going to talk about that next thing.
Oh yeah, this is the hard part, responding to feedback. I'll give you a little bit of a short story about my experience. The first time I got feedback from my chair, I about had a cow. I could not believe that I had gotten so much wrong, in spite of the fact that I had really invested a lot of time in crafting this document. Well, I'll tell you what, this was my reaction. I don't want to hear it. Don't want to talk to you. No, not going to listen. You're wrong. All of those thoughts went through my head. But eventually I had to walk away because I remember one time the feedback I got, I was so upset. I said, I'm reading this, I'm putting it away. I'm walking away because this is too much. This is too much. I can't take it. The bottom line is by walking away, and we mentioned taking the time to contemplate earlier on in this presentation, but because I took the time to walk away, when I came back to that work and I saw those comments, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes some sense. Oh, I did that, really? And I started to just come to grips with, yes, I'm not perfect, although I thought I was. And yes, there was something that I could learn from this feedback. Ultimately, you need to get to the space where when you do get feedback, and yeah, you ain't gonna like it, that's given, but read through it, take a break, go do some laundry, make dinner or something, come on back, read it again, and I'm sure you're gonna have a different opinion the second time. Not only that, but you will see within your work exactly what it is that the chair or whichever member of your committee was trying, the point that they were trying to get across. Ultimately, we want you to get to a space where you're comfortable going through and making revisions or taking the time to schedule time with your chair to have a conversation. And to that end, I'm gonna, I know we're short on time here, but let's talk a little bit about this mentor-mentee relationship. You're in an online university. that doesn't mean that you are communicating only with a computer screen. There's a person on the other side of that screen that you should be communicating with on a regular basis. And when I say regular, first thing I do when I have a new student in the dissertation sequence, I schedule a call. And what's the first thing I tell them? You can talk to me every week. And here's the link to schedule a meeting with me every week. Go ahead and schedule 12 meetings. And most the students who actually pay attention to that and go ahead and take advantage of me as a resource, those are the students who they get done very quickly, actually. Because each week when they are learning things that they don't understand, or they see something that they don't understand, they come to me. I have resources. If I don't know the answer, I know where to get it. And I help them think through the process of writing this dissertation. That is what the chair is there for. So all of these little questions that we have on here, they are so true. But the key that I like to bring forth to every student, whether they're mine or not, make an appointment with your chair and have that conversation. Dr. Allen, what do you have to add here?
I would just add a couple things. Your chair has been there. They've been in your shoes. They understand that, early on, my chair used to say, just remember, Brian, this is a rite of passage. You have to go through this process to develop yourself as a researcher so that you are capable and able to continue your research, not just to complete your doctorate, but well after your doctorate. And I am so grateful for what he taught me. Now, the other thing that I want you to think about, and I'm going to add two little comments here, and then we're going to wrap this up with our last slide. As the researcher, I want you to think of yourself as the basketball player, the volleyball player, the baseball player. You are the one playing, and you may be a great player. You may be a great writer. You may be a great everything, but the mentor is your coach. That's what they're there for. They're not there to play for you. They're there to help you play more effectively, to be successful. And good players note what their coaches give them as advice. They write it down. They keep notes. If you look at what basketball players do to improve their performance, they are going to look at the team they're playing next week, who they're going to be playing against, and they know exactly what they're going to do. Guess what? In your process, you need to be thinking the same thing. I know this is the next step in my dissertation writing process. I know this is the next step in my coursework. I'm going to reach out to my mentor. I'm going to reach out to your academic advisor and say, hey, who could I talk to that might lead the program and who help me out? I'm not quite to the mentor stage, but I need some assistance. And that actually takes us to our next slide. And really probably one of the most important parts of this whole journey, it is that you are not alone. You are 100% part of a team. Yes, you are playing to your capacity and to your ability, but is under the direction and with the assistance of staff and coaches to help you get to where you get to wear those robes, walk across that stage, and be a successful doctoral learner. Thank you so much for your time. I'll turn the last few moments over to Dr. Bakari.
Well, I'm just going to add another little analogy to the chair and candidate relationship. It's like this. You're in the driver's seat. You've got control of the steering wheel, the gas pedal, the gear stick. I'm in the back seat and I've got my phone, and my phone is set up on maps, and I'm basically your GPS along the way. I'll tell you when you need to turn right or left. I'll tell you when you need to stop, where there's a detour. But the fact is, who has control of that gas pedal? Who has control of the steering wheel? So it's a team effort. with your work, your hard work, our guidance will get you over the finish line. And I know we don't have too much time for questions, do we?
I know we have a couple minutes.
Okay.
But luckily, as we were moving through the presentation, Dr. Allen was able to answer some of the questions in the chat. I don't think that there was anything in there that we would be answering today that was applicable to today. Just some comments here, some great lessons. Thanks for sharing this knowledge. Really appreciate this presentation and you both. Of course, we will post this recording. I will send it to everyone who is registered for the event, and then it will always be in our CTL resource center under our webinars. And we do have a public YouTube channel as well too. So that's pretty fun. So nothing else right now. Question wise, Dr. Bakari, Dr. Allen, thank you so much for coming and sharing. And your presentation was super engaging and wonderful to watch just from an aesthetic standpoint, as well as the content that you covered during this presentation. So we're very grateful for that. And until the next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.